Hey folks, welcome back to session 2, Evolution of Vision. Metamorphosis of the Visionary, whichever way you want to look at it. Sorry about the delay. I have a funny feeling that the problem with Dave's computer is that it is greatly affected by the music he chooses. And it just trashes the system. But anyway. Let's go with this. We had a good session last night. I'm really, really pleased with it, with your grasp on something that, is not easy. But as I said in the beginning yesterday, this class has haunted me because of the scope and the vital nature of the class as it applies to you personally. When you deal with prophecy, the probable and possible futures, you tend to get, you can get exacting and stuff like that as far as time, date, place, but it tends to be removed from the self. It tends to be more toward the broad spectrum of things rather than you as an individual. But by taking in something, this place of the early warning, we're moving this whole process now into a very, very intimate kind of an association with self, with family, without losing any of the accuracy. Remember, I said that one of the big problems is that the self-serving nature we have to be careful with. And usually what happens if something gets too self-serving, number one, it doesn't work, or number two, it gives you more of an obscure type of a feedback that's hard to discern and to work through. But by going this route, and you'll see why in short order, we tend to take the issue of self-serving and set it aside. It no longer has much of a bearing. But anyway, as I said, this has haunted me because this class is going to be so instrumental in the very, very near future. And it's, like I said, if, I run this class 5 years ago, people would get it, but the urgency would not have been there. Now, the urgency is great. So I think that has a lot to do with precipitating the tremendous results that you folks have had thus far. And as I said in the beginning, I always assumed that the very, very accurate predictions and prophecies, especially when it concerned the self or the family, was a gift that we were born into. But then I come to find out that, that's not the case. That can be trained if you know how to go about doing it. Now, we started with, yesterday, the prayer of warning, that thing that I have emphasized since, for a couple of years now, that at least once a day, better yet twice, to go into that very powerful and passionate prayer of early warning. It's a necessity. It's a life or death situation now. And the more you use it, the more powerful the results become. But the problem is that it cannot be done by saying, "Dear God, please warn me." I mean, that is hardly a prayer of passion. That is hardly coming from, the core of your soul. This prayer of early warning where you're begging, you're calling up to the Creator, is so deep, so visceral, so powerful. It's all-consuming. But it stands to reason, and as I showed you yesterday, as you say that prayer, and then either surrender or go to the profound silence, or both, suddenly you can feel things change. A place, an identity, an energy begins to emerge. And that's the place that receives these early warnings. Some of them very, very slight to begin with, but with more practice they get more powerful. But it stands to reason, since that is the receiver of these early warnings, it is also the place where we receive warnings about the future, the probable and possible future, and then also the past, how that is relevant to not only our now, but to the future. And that's why I emphasized that, and that's why I asked you again last night and throughout the day, whenever you had a chance, to call up that prayer of warning. But don't end there. Silence it, surrender it, and pay attention to that place that it takes you to, that consciousness, that identity, that power. Because that is where everything is going to come from. And again, with practice, you begin to develop a barometer where at first a low visceral warning would be something doesn't feel quite right, or you get a feeling of unease, and you go across the whole spectrum to a full-blown panic, where all of a sudden that is a huge warning. But you don't end there. When you get this feeling and you simply either surrender to it or silence yourself to it, and then what'll happen is the thing that is precipitating it, originating it, will be revealed. You'll know that it's an ambush laying in wait. You'll know it's a chemical spill. You'll know it's radiation poisoning or something like that. It lies in that ability to purge yourself with surrender or silence, and then pay attention to what either unfolds if you're in the silence, or what comes back from the abyss of nothingness if you're in the surrender. But as I said, this is the ground, the consciousness, the energy, where all of this springs forth, where the seeds are planted. Let me just go a couple other things here, by way of review, of course. When you are given a warning, as you grow more sensitive to that urgent consciousness, you will find that the warnings come earlier and are more specific. So essentially, at first you would pick up an ambush already set up and waiting. But as you learn and become sensitive, you then pick up on the ambush being planned, but not quite in place yet. Going further with that exercise, go back to a moderate negative event, using that event as a starting point. In other words, that moment of execution or impact of that event, while staying centered in that place. Move backward in time as things begin to come together in creation of that event. And every once in a while, when you surrender or you silence, whether it's by plan or just it happens, you will be given some element in that timeline of what brought that event into place, and insights into how to negate it, how to make a probable future into a possible or even a distant possible. And I ask you to ask that question, what could I have done to minimize, disrupt, or have kept that from happening? We talked a little bit about the timeline, and I said yesterday, I should have warned you that as you get into this, time starts to get distorted. You tend to think things take longer than they do or shorter than they do. That'll clear up with experience. And then I ask you again, homework, to lock in to that prayer with all of that fervor, with all of that passion, with all of that need. And as soon as you say that prayer, surrender or silence and feel that place, that identity, that energy emerge, because that place is going to be instrumental in all of what we're doing with this. Then let me see. I said last night as we ended, as you become more and more aware and sensitive to this place, you will find that not only are major warnings intensified, but you become aware of a timeline and events along that timeline that can be easily changed. So too will you be able to go into the past to change the near and distant future. And that's what we're going to be working with tonight, is starting that whole scenario. We've got to check our systems, folks. Let's take that 10 minutes and we'll get back together. Hey folks, welcome back. Let me explain something to you here because it's very important. As you begin to get into this in a bigger way, then, it's one thing to put out there that prayer of warning and then pay attention to the barometer within you throughout the day. And anytime anything awakens or triggers something in that barometer, you surrender to it or silence to it and pay attention, of course, to what comes back or what happens, evolves. Sometimes it takes more research than just, surrendering to it. You might have to go deeper and back again. For instance, the one thing that I tell people, as you get into this, pay attention to emotion that all of a sudden blindsides you. It seems to come upon you, but have no bearing or no origin at first. And it could be you're going about your daily work and everything else, and all of a sudden you start to feel very sad or very upset about something. And yet there's nothing that you can see in that past few hours that precipitated that cause and effect within you. That's a good time to research it, because that in and of itself is part of the language of that barometer. We'll get into the language of that barometer more so tomorrow. But pay attention to these stray emotions, because more often than not, they have some bearing on that barometer, and it bears more research, so to speak, on your part. Now, I don't know. I want to throw something out there right now and then just let it seed for a moment. As grandfather said, the lineage said, when you go into that prayer and begging for a warning, and you surrender that prayer, you will begin to feel a place, an energy, an identity develop first within you and then finally all around you too. It's not just within, it's also around. It's part of, if you will, the final oneness, part of that equation. Eventually, when you start to get into the timeline that is leading up to a negative event or happening, occurrence beginning to unfold or take shape, don't look toward changing an event along the timeline. Like, in other words, you see something unfold or unfolding, and you change somebody's thoughts, you change something. Instead of changing that something, change the energy that is generated from it. Now, I'll explain that later on. See, let's say someone is planning an ambush, or someone is planning a deadly attack on something. And in that timeline, you're led to the early planning stages. You can take and, of course, go into that with empowered prayer and attack the thought processes going on in that person to precipitate that person talking themselves out of it. Or, what's more vital, instead of boxing yourself in, just change the energy. Change that core energy of hatred, of anger, of prejudice, or whatever it is, into something else. It's a lot easier to change the energy than it is to change the actual event along that timeline. But all I want to do right now is have you seed that. Just remember it. Now, I want to lead you into an exercise here, and I want to try to minimize the element of something being self-serving. So basically, I'm going to ask you to pick someone that you know who is more of an acquaintance than a friend. Now, you've heard me say before, as grandfather said, you notice how easy it is to solve someone else's problems? You know, you hear somebody complaining about something, you say, quit your job, get another job. It's that easy. No, it isn't that easy for that person because they're emotionally involved. So basically, we are given a lot of latitude as shaman, as healers, in dealing with other people, in that we can see things, feel things, sense things about them that we can help them change or manipulate. And this brings us to picking someone who you know deep, instinctually, is going to be heading for a wake-up call on a negative level. In other words, they're about to blunder into bad medicine. Whether you have any physical evidence or not, it doesn't make a difference, because all you have to do is surrender to that person or silence toward that person, and you will be given things that are about to occur in their lives that is going to disturb them, hurt them, frighten them, whatever. Now, what I want you to do is, with that person in your mind, open yourself to the probable future of a negative event. As soon as you do that, you take on the role as a healer. And suddenly there's a lot of spiritual information opened up to you. At that point, cry up that prayer of early warning. That's like your triggering mechanism, or you've done this enough now You know what that place, that identity, that energy feels like. Just shift into it. But have them be the center focus. Have them be the necessity for that empowered need. So when you shift, or you surrender, or you silence to that place, they are the theme. Not you, they. Because that's what you've willed, that's what you've conjured in your mind. That's your mission, that's your need. So you can imagine this goes with a lot of empowered vision, passionate vision, passionate need. Then, even though that event hasn't occurred yet, you know deep inside that something's going to happen. You may even get glimmers of what it's going to be. Using that as your now, back up in time. Now, as the event in the future, the probable future, back up in time, almost fluidly, without consciously trying to surrender or trying to go to the silence, until you hit a point where suddenly that silence, that surrender comes naturally. And what's going to happen is something is going to unfold, or something is going to reveal itself. It is at that point that you've been led to that you can change that person's probable future. Minimize the impact of it, eradicate it completely. And whatever you feel that has to be done, do it on a spiritual level, not a physical level. Again, and this is, as you can imagine, hard to explain. It's exactly what Grandfather had Rick and I do. Let me give you the example that I used. There was this kid in school who he never took care of himself. He was diabetic. He completely blew off, the rules of anybody being diabetic. Sometimes he'd go into a diabetic shock or whatever, and then come out of it and have a laugh and all this. It wasn't funny. But anyway, I used him, an acquaintance, and I saw late in the day, as his blood sugar was starting to screw around, that he was going to get into something bad, and it had to do with his health. I didn't know anything about the mechanics of diabetes or anything else, but I focused upon that. I went into that prayer of early warning, but using him like I was the liaison asking for him. And I felt myself slipping back to breakfast, but breakfast was already over. We were in school at the time. What it led me to do was, at lunch, something mysteriously appeared in his lunchbox. I can't remember what it was, but it was so poignant, so urgent, this food. It wasn't a sweet or anything like that. It was something else. I can't remember what it was. And I just, from my lunch, I put it into his lunch. So as if his mother or somebody had packed it. Late in the afternoon, he did go through an episode, but nowhere near what I sought to be in the probable future. It was enough to make him nearly kind of pass out, but not. The school nurse took care of him and stuff, gave him some liquid or whatever it was that she gave him, and he was fine. But looking back, if I hadn't given him that, then it would have been much worse. It could have, who knows, it could have been death. But he was an acquaintance. He was not a friend that, you know, I could say, hey, how you doing, you know, that kind of thing. But not a friend. So there was not much self-serving in there. And suddenly, when I used him as the center of my focus, the center of my empowered prayer, I took on the role of healer, caregiver, and thus a world of information and intimacy opened up to me that I would not have been privy to if I was not the healer. That's when it all unfolded. It was like it was so effortless. Now, I would be a fool to believe that everybody's going to have a success with this. But I know that all I have to have you do is go through the mechanics to see how it's done. And there'll be enough successes by this time tomorrow night that it should illustrate what I'm trying to get across. What I want you to do is sit for a few minutes, thinking about the people you'll come in contact with throughout the day. And allow that one person to suddenly take precedence over all the others. Keep coming back to that person a couple of times in your thoughts to make sure that is the one. Then, all you have to do is empower that prayer, asking, what is the negative event that lies in this person's future, and either surrender or silence at the end of that prayer. Remember, that's going to move you to that place. Pay attention to what unfolds. You're going to be seeing into the future. And then holding that person in your mind, go backward. You going backward is actually still forward in time. We haven't reached that point yet, so to speak, on that timeline. You're going to move backward until the now. At that moment when you're thinking, go back any further, it's too late. Well, in some cases. But what'll happen is you're going to find yourself, as you back up from that person in that event, you're going to find yourself stopping, surrendering, silencing, unrequested. And suddenly something is going to come from that, coming from the same place where you go for the early warning. Do it. Whatever it asks you to do, do it. Now, most of it, because of the situation we're in, the spirit world knows that we're not able to get to that person or that event. So everything will be on a spiritual level, probably. But pay attention to all the details. Write the details down that you see. Because the action that you're going to take now is going to have bearing on the future, probable future. You understand? I think you understand what I mean. This is an important one. Take 20 minutes to do it, 5 minutes to write me back with your thoughts. Let's do it, gang. Hey folks, welcome back. You know, I've been racking my brain to try to figure out what's left of it, try to figure out what it was in the event that happened in my life dealing with this this kid that I went to school with who was, you know, diabetic. He was having issues, and kind of kid that wouldn't pay attention to what he was eating and stuff like that, and he didn't take his problems seriously enough. But anyway, of all things, and this is how this fell into place, when we did this exercise, this was the day before that event and took place, or I saw it taking place. And I saw, you know, his sister crying in school. I saw an ambulance there. I saw his parents rushing to school. I saw this whole scenario unfolding, and quite frightening, and I could see him looking as if he was dead. Well, anyway, this whole journey that I took happened like the day before. So I'm getting ready for school, and of all things, my brother at the time was with the Cub Scouts, and he was learning how to make dried fruit. And to say that in a stretch of the imagination, you might have called it dried fruit. But I remember part of it was dried apples, and there's something else in there. And my mom had put out a couple of bags of it, I guess to get rid of it. So anyway, one ended up in my lunch, and went to school. I knew as soon as that hit my lunch bag that I had to try to transfer to him. And it had to be before lunch. So covertly, they put all the lunch bags and boxes in the kind of little cafeteria there while the kids, would go to classes and stuff. So they'd be there when they, went on recess. So I found his bag and stuff quickly enough, stuck it in there, and the kid figures his mother did it. Anyway, turns to come to find out, as the closeness of the event that was supposed to take place, all he was feeling was a little dizzy, lightheadedness, like he was going to pass out, but nothing big. Come to find out that when he did get down to the nurse's office, the little thing that he would carry with him for an emergency, he had left at home. So basically that confirmed, but what it taught me is the way that this all fell into place. Seeing that event so vividly by changing my role as crying up for that prayer of warning, not for me, but for him. Reading and interpreting the end results, and then going back in the timeline. Now I'm in the day before. And that night before when we were doing it, so to speak, and I knew there had to be something done to prevent him from going into whatever he went into, diabetic shock or whatever. I'm not sure even now of what took place with all of that, but it was enough to stop the whole thing from happening. I know there's not a doubt in my mind that if that dried, whatever you call it, fruit, wasn't in his lunch bag, it would have been far worse than just lightheadedness and dizziness and having to go to the nurse's office, so to speak. It would have been a lot more sinister and far-reaching. I mean, I could see his parents rushing there, his sister crying, and everything. It was so vivid. But I love the way it unfolded, because as I move back in time, still in the future, but in other words, this all takes place tomorrow if it was happening right now. I'm coming back. By the time we reach lunchtime tomorrow, I knew something had to be in his bag. I didn't know what it was. Ironically, it was already waiting for me. When, my mom had packed it up. I wouldn't have eaten it anyway. My brother made it. But anyway, I'm looking through your feedback. I don't want to take the time to read any of them out loud right now, but it seems that to me, you're getting a grip on something that's very, very difficult to teach, far less explain. Now, I want to take this a bit further with this whole scenario. I want to move it back to you. Now, what I'm going to have you do is, and we're going to try to create the scenario where this is going to take place, an event that's going to take place tomorrow. And here, it's got to be something that has a possibility of happening. For instance, you know you have a meeting you got to attend tomorrow, or you know that when you leave for work tomorrow, they're going to be working on a roadway again. You're going to be tied up in traffic, But you're going to get into that personal prayer of warning. Get into that arena, get into that place. And now you're going to empower the need that you've got to know when a negative event is going to occur tomorrow. And go with it. Go in and out of surrender, go in and out of silence. Let it build itself. Let it build detail. Then I want you to slowly work backwards in time. While you hold that event that's still tomorrow sometime, move back in time until suddenly something is going to plop, something's going to trigger above everything else. At this moment is the single most important pivotal point in changing that probable future. And just so that you're secure and confident in your notion that this is it, move yourself all the way back to now, or now, right now, so to speak. Then go back to that event again. You haven't done anything yet. You've only isolated and identified the probable event, and you're moved back and you have a probable solution. Go back through and repeat it again. See if that A intensifies, and B, if it gives you more. In other words, clarifies. Now, whatever it is, write it down. If you can't do anything now about it, to change something now, then you're going to get a sense of what time tomorrow you can make that change. And you have to do it then. And then watch it unfold. When you hit that moment that you saw, it's going to be far different than what you anticipated, what you saw in your vision. So again, you're going to become self-absorbed. You're going to go to that place. You're going to cry up for an early warning about some event tomorrow that you know you may have to face. It may be troubling. It may be upsetting, whatever. And just simply surrender or silence yourself. You've already set the parameters, the questions, the yearning, the need, the empowered vision. What is it? When is it coming? Then, holding that in your mind, back up in the timeline. Just allow yourself to drift back in time. Little scenarios will crop up, visions, maybe words, people, but eventually you're going to hit some element that it's going to say inside of you, that's it. Research it. If you can't do anything now about it, then at the appointed time tomorrow, that's the time to implement it. And then, of course, we'll be the judge tomorrow if and when this thing either unfolds, or if it does unfold, is minimized from what you first saw. This is an important one, gang. I'm going to give you 20 minutes to do this and 5 minutes to write me back. Really concentrate on it. Kind of like do this 2, 3, 4 times to really reinforce the pivotal point and the probable negative future, so that you get a very clear understanding of what has to be done. And again, I apologize. This is a very difficult night of trying to explain what to do. But if we can make it through this, the rest is going to come easy the rest of the week. Let's do it, gang. Hey gang, welcome back. I'm looking through your your feedback. One thing caught my attention, and it's very important, from Chris. He says, I have a long drive tomorrow and saw a combination of construction and a small accident. As I moved back, I kept getting pulled to the place I get gas. As soon as I felt I should get gas somewhere else, a weight was lifted off my shoulders and I felt a sense of relief. That's the kind of thing that you're looking for in doing something like this. There's that visceral, emotional that comes up, and you don't know why, but it makes you feel better. Like something's lifted, blinders have been taken off, or something like that. There's a certain peace that comes with it. I remember when I did this, we had set this up, for the personal thing like you've been doing, the day before at grandfather's camp. And I saw it vividly what was going to happen if I didn't do what, I had been instructed to do, so to speak. And I got to camp the next day, and grandfather said, so how did it work out? And essentially, I told him I got slammed. And he said, you forgot to do it, didn't you? And I said, yeah, I did. So I tried to make up for it by doing it later than it should have been done. What I'm talking about is the thing that would have changed it. And just being 15 or 20 minutes late, it made it worse. So it's got to be exactly. So this is a warning to you. In whatever you're told to do here, in minimizing that probable future, in order to make that into a possible, it could be something right now that you're choosing to do that will modify that, will negate it, will destroy it, so to speak. Or it's something you have to do at a certain time tomorrow. Don't forget to do it, all right? Or it's not going to work out. Now, what I want you to do, the first thing when you get in tomorrow into the chat room, let me know of your successes or failures with this particular exercise, because it won't pan out until the event actually occurs and you were able to take care of it. What I love about this is that, you get hit with something. Let's say it's a big negative. It's a number 8 on the negative scale. And you know that if back here you do something, that 8 is going to become a 1 or a 2. Okay? So what you do is you do what you're told to do, and certainly that became a 2. But now you've got a golden opportunity. You say to yourself, what if I didn't do that, what I was told to do, so to speak? And you can see logically how it would have panned out, that probable future would have been, nasty, if you had not intervened in your own probable future. Now, this whole thing that we're going through tonight was the one thing I was worried about, because it is very difficult to explain. It's very difficult to also set up an exercise where you can use someone else to minimize the self-serving aspect of it, to get an insight coming from their perspective on some negative event, and then find out what you need to do to minimize that negative event, and then follow through. And then, of course, with yourself, your biggest problem here is if you forget to do it when you're supposed to do it. And like I said, some of you might be doing it right now by just being aware of it and making a little change right now. You're gonna take care of a whole mess of crap tomorrow. It's not going to unfold. Now, as far as homework is concerned, I want you to get into the habit and stay away from very, very close friends and loved ones for right now. That won't have a bearing later on. But for this point in your development, it's best to kind of give you some insulation from very close friends. The acquaintances are the ones that are going to work best. Now, what I want you to try to get in the habit of doing, because this is going to come right across the board, not only to who you're doing this with, I'm going to ask you to do this with now, but also for everybody in the future. As you go about your workaday world, become very aware of your acquaintances that are around you. And every once in a while, if one of them, your attention is drawn to one of them, more so than normal, that's an indicator that there's something there that is going to communicate. Simply because this is what we're working on, I want you to kind of surrender to them in a way so you could possibly see an upcoming negative event that's going to occur for them. And then do whatever it takes to prevent that from happening. But this is more of a lesson in becoming aware of negative events in other people's lives. Call it, bad, a negative future, so to speak. And the more you do this, the more sensitive you get. Eventually, that will translate over into your closest friends, family, and of course, into the self. Now, gang, we're going to end it a little early tonight. Tomorrow, we're going to be going later, and I don't want to get into anything new right now and then have it, just have to rush it. So we got through the hard day, which is today, and you've done really well. Your feedback is better than I expected. But remember, don't forget to do what you've been asked to do to take care of that negative future, and also pay attention to the people who are working around you to see if you can become aware of when they're going to blunder into something that's going to get nasty. Thanks, gang. Good night.